Mr. Speaker, the credit reporting bill is being presented for its second reading. The first reading having been had on the 28th of March. The second reading of the bill, Mr. Speaker, will then open up for debate on this important piece of legislation. The bill constitutes an essential part of our strategy for strengthening the legal and business underpinnings required to support a modern credit reporting system and to maintain the fiscal stability within the Federation. The primary objective of the bill is the establishment of a regulatory and supervisory framework to support an advanced and fair credit reporting system in St. Kitts and Nevis, and by extension, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. The bill supports the establishment of a credit bureau to improve the collection and sharing of information across the currency union. Perhaps I should say that this is a model piece of legislation. It is a uniform bit of legislation that has already been implemented in a number of member states within the currency union, and St. Kitts and Nevis is following in that path. So while we are now giving it life in the context of our legislative agenda here, the intention is that across all member states within the currency union, a similar type of legislation will be in vogue, thus allowing for information collection cross-border. For the information of the general public, the Credit Bureau can be seen as an agency that collects information from creditors, other relevant information sources, and available public sources, for example, the Court of Justice, on a borrower's credit history. The purpose of the Bureau or the agency is to collate information that would indicate the borrowing behavior of customers and thereby create what is referred to as the credit history of a person. The Bureau compiles information such as repayment records, court judgments, and bankruptcies. A comprehensive report is then created that is made available to the creditor at a cost. That is, those who are interested in lending will go to the Credit Bureau and get information for which they will pay. This information will assist creditors to improve their assessment of the creditworthiness of a borrower. The Credit Bureau would be allowed to collect information from credit providers, such as banks, credit unions, insurance companies, mortgage companies, and also public sources like our courts, our civil records offices, and social security boards. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is to be implemented in all member states of the currency union. The aim then is to create a credit reporting system for the OECS. We are attempting, Mr. Speaker, to add to the efficiency and efficacy of lending within the currency union. And this bill, by and large, will take us into modernity, if you will, in relation to the management of credit within our jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, the bill is about information sharing. And we must bear in mind, in previous sittings of the Parliament, we introduced Data Protection Bill, which was intended to provide protection and to regulate the circumstances under which information can be passed between parties. So it shows how important, again, the legislative agenda of the government has been and how things are being well coordinated. The legislative drafters have ensured that in this bill, certain consumer protection principles are embedded. The bill provides for accuracy, confidentiality, and the proper use of information. It also addresses other pertinent issues, such as the licensing of persons who wish to offer credit reporting services, because this now become a business activity in which entities will engage and sell services. Persons who can request a credit report and credit information providers. It also provides for the accessibility by customers to their credit information and general offenses in relation to the providing of false information and the handling of customer complaints. Why is this bill important, Mr. Speaker? Important from a number of respects. The bill will help to improve the quality of credit information provided to lenders and overall efficiency in the distribution of credit in the currency union and in St. Kitts and Nevis in particular. It will help to reduce credit risks, processing times, the costs, and over-reliance on collateral to back credit. You go to the banks, you go to the credit union, and to get a loan, they need your house, your land, and perhaps every other asset. And part of the reason is that there's high uncertainty in the market, and therefore persons are not able to as accurately adjudge the credit risk attached to any borrower. This is where this particular legislation will come in handy, in that through the instrumentality of the Credit Bureau and related agencies, one will now have a credit history of the borrower, and one could use that as one of the indicators to make a determination whether or not one is creditworthy and the risks attached thereto. It is generally acknowledged that access to credit markets is a critical driver of economic growth and household welfare, given its role in enabling individuals to supplement income and undertake long-term investments. So, for example, the education of our children, mortgages with respect to housing, working capital for our businesses. Mr. Speaker, credit is important to all of us. Without credit, many of us would not have been able to achieve and to attain some of the things that we consider to be important to ourselves. And so it is not only important at the level of the individual, but it's also important at the macro level. When we look, for example, at the historic start of our second cruise pair, which was promised 20 years before Team Unity, financing had always been a critical part to its execution. And we were able to do what no administration 20 years before us could have done because of the confidence in the financing and investing market, both in SCASPA and in the country at large. I want again to commend those who form part of the domestic syndicated arrangement that mobilized US $48 million, just over $120 million to give St. Kitts and Nevis the historic second cruise pair and the enduring business benefits of an expanding cruise and commercial upland development in Basseterre. The participants were the St. Kitts and Nevis Anguilla National Bank, the Social Security Board, the SIDF, FinCo, and SNCC. Credit reporting, Mr. Speaker, then, is critically important, and it allows the system as a whole to work efficiently. It is true to say that our credit reporting systems in the OECS and in CARICOM member states are relatively underdeveloped, and this is often reflected in the relatively inefficient credit markets, which are characterized by higher borrowing costs, the over-reliance on the use of collateral, delayed credit approvals, and the credit rationing, thereby resulting in the underfunding of some quality projects. It is the information asymmetry which is at work in the marketplace, Mr. Speaker, that leads to the tardiness in financial institutions, banks and non-banks being able to respond in a timely way to the demands for credit. And in this regard, the existence of a regulated credit bureau and alike agencies will help to bring greater efficiencies. When we look at the cost of borrowing in the OECS, in CARICOM vis-a-vis the USA, we see stark differences. Some of them, of course, are related to issues of demand and supply, and some of them are related to inefficiencies and the non-competitiveness in the marketplace, which arise because we do not have the kind of institutional support which this particular bill is intended to bring to St. Kitts and Nevis. Importantly, while we are doing this in the context of the OECS, a similar piece of legislation, indeed there is the model legislation at the level of the CARICOM community, which we discussed last Tuesday in Barbados as part of the meeting of the CARICOM Council of Finance and Planning, and the way in which we can move the region forward, assist with the growth, assist with greater efficiencies in the financial sector, which is so critical to the health of the region. Returning to the specifics of the bill sets out the regulatory and supervisory framework, limits on the access to data and data protection, deals with matters of consumer rights, establish minimum criteria for credit reporting service providers, and the assignment of liability conditions for participants in the system. The bill provides for the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to be designated as the supervising authority and to be charged with the responsibility for the day-to-day administration, supervision, and implementation of the legislation and accompanying regulations. This institution also has the authority to review and recommend applications for license to the Minister of Finance and maintain general supervisory oversight of the credit reporting regime within the currency union. Mr. Speaker, this bill has some 9 parts. Part 1, which covers clauses 1 and 2, addresses preliminary matters such as title, commencement, and the interpretation of terms used in the bill. Part 2 deals with matters of administration. Part 3, clauses 4 to 16 captured under Part 3, deals with issues relating to the licensing of credit bureaus, which become the critical linchpin in our efforts to bring a modern institutional framework to respond to the needs for financing in the marketplace. The bill establishes a licensing framework for the central bank to to suspend, to refuse to grant, and revoke licenses to carry on consumer and corporate credit reporting businesses. The issuance of a license will authorize a credit bureau to operate within the territorial space of the currency union. An application for a license to operate or carry on the business of a credit bureau in the currency union shall be made to the central bank, and it lays out quite clearly what should accompany that application. Information, for example, to the satisfaction of the central bank regarding the startup capital of the credit bureau, certificate of incorporation, proposed operations manuals and operation systems, including IT systems and location of the business operation. Mr. Speaker, the terms and conditions of license are outlined at Clause 9, and Clause 11 restricts a credit bureau from selling, leasing, or transferring title of any of its credit files to another credit bureau licensed under this legislation without the approval of the central bank. Clause 12 outlines restrictions on the employment of persons who could be part of the management and directing mind of a credit bureau. Those issues are addressed. What happens to someone who has been declared bankrupt? What happens to someone who has been involved in fraud, etc.? How those people will be able to interact, to participate, to be engaged in a business providing the kind of support that the credit bureaus are intended to do. Clause 13 to 16 address the payment of fees, material changes in circumstances affecting the credit entity, the suspension and revocation of license, and the publication of the grant of the license and like matters. Part 4 deals with activities of the credit bureau, and Part 4 captures clauses 17 to 32. So matters related to supervision by the bank are covered there. In Part 6 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, the issue of civil liability is raised and it is addressed. What happens then when a person fails to comply with any of the requirements imposed under this bill and accompanying regulations? Those matters are addressed specifically at Part 6. At Part 7, there is provision for Credit Reporting Review Commission, and that encapsulates clauses 41 to 44, where the provision is made for the Review Commission for the purpose of hearing and determining applications for review. The bill empowers the Review Commission to hear and determine applications by an aggrieved data subject or customer in the event that the credit bureau does not issue a decision within the prescribed time for resolving disputes. An aggrieved credit bureau may also seek a review of the action or decision of the central bank. So the central bank is the regulator. The central bank determines who will get a license, whose license will be suspended. But embodied in this section, Part 7, is the provision for an aggrieved party, someone who feels unfair or wrong by the decision of the central bank to have recourse to an appeal mechanism. And then in Part 8, the bill specifically addresses appeals to the High Court and also the Court of Appeal. Part 9 provides miscellaneous provisions in clauses 47 to 57 and sets out the establishment of offenses, penalties, protection of databases upon liquidation, and immunity provisions. Mr. Speaker, it should be clear from the presentation aforegoing that the credit reporting bill under consideration by this Honourable House is very relevant and timely to help with the development of the financial services sector in St. Kitts and Nevis. The availability of credit in the marketplace will determine whether new businesses, new entities are able to come on stream. The availability of credit in the marketplace will determine whether we are able to add a room to our house, do expansion, obtain a motor vehicle. These are all important considerations in the lives of individuals. But the society reflects the amalgam of all the individuals operating as economic actors, and their decisions determine whether the country moves forward or not. So we need this modern piece of legislation to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the Eastern Caribbean currency financial space, and to help guide decision makers in making objective credit decisions. Sometimes people go to the bank and they say they don't understand why the bank turned them down. Hopefully now, with your credit history, once you get that and you as the individual could go and you are able to access that according to law, I think at least once per year, you know how you're standing. If you figure that the evaluation that has been determined through all the relevant pieces of information made available to the Bureau is wrong, you can ask them to make correction. Again, that is being provided. And where you get your report and you determine that it is wrong, inaccurate, again, you have recourse and you can demand that the necessary corrections are being made. But with your scorecard now, you know whether you should sit down and wait a while before you go to anybody else to borrow. You see that you are in a bad way, that you are overextended. And these are the objective elements that a lender must bring into consideration before he or she determines to lend. It is not good enough to have a good project. Importantly, from the vantage point of the lender, he or she has to ensure that the institution that is lending has the best reasonable prospect of being repaid. And if you already owe courts too much, you already owe Horsfords too much, you already owe your friends too much, you're already not paying child support, all these things will be against you. Child maintenance. You already have these things chalked up against you. And therefore there is a place for us as individuals to become more conscious. Yes. Sometimes we will have to take time to get there, because sometimes in our anxiety to get on with life, we overextend ourselves. And when we do that, we have problems facing the financial institutions seeking their support. This is one of the challenges which we face. And so we are hoping that by bringing this bit of legislation, introducing the Credit Bureau, again we bring some semblance of reasonableness and rationality to decision-making with respect to lending. Again, there were some old lessons from long ago. Cutting your cloth according to your garment, and other wisdom. Cut your garment according to your cloth. And you see how easy you could get it wrong. And if you invert it, you could end up being in as problematic a situation that you are being chastised to take notice of. We all want a better quality of life. And all of us, through the grace of God, would get that. Sometimes it's a matter of timing. Sometimes it's a matter of preparing ourselves. Sometimes it is disciplining ourselves to save so that you can have something to put in for you to be able to go to the bank, your credit union, and say, help me part of the way. These habits of thrift and savings have to be instilled very early. And that also speaks to the kind of parenting we give to those under our care. Sometimes the children have to learn that on this occasion you will have to do without, because mommy and daddy wants a better house. And if we buy everything that you want rather than what you need, we may end up jeopardizing our chance to give you and to give ourselves that better home. So it is in itself a call to order, a better understanding of how credit services are being preferred in the country, and how we must take personal responsibility for the way in which we live our lives. Mr. Speaker, it is an eminently important bill whose time has come. Few countries within the region have moved to set up the regulatory framework for institutions such as the Credit Bureau. I think Guyana has, Trinidad has, perhaps Jamaica. We in the OECS are moving there. And I hope that this bill, non-controversial as it is, important as it is to incentivizing credit within St. Kitts and Nevis, within the currency union, will have the wholesome support of the Honourable House. With those few words, or perhaps too many, I commend the bill to safe passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Stay up to date with news, programs, and activities of the government with SKNIS. Like us on Facebook. Listen to us on SoundCloud. Follow us on Twitter. And watch our videos on YouTube. Connect with us today. SKNIS, St. Kitts and Nevis Information Service.